All right, welcome back to another episode, Persuasion by the Pint. It's episode 22. I'm Jonathan Taylor, along with...
Sean McCool.
Did you say Shauna?
No, I did not. Must have heard that.
I'm just hearing things. Okay. So speaking of words that we're hearing, let's talk about what's our next book, because we're actually kind of taking a different path on this episode. We mentioned it in the previous. We're kind of take a sidestep here and get into a book.
Yeah, give people a little bit of a break from breakthrough advertising. So this book is one of my favorite and like go-to books for coaching, for writing copy, for consulting, like everything I do.
Yeah,
I will refer to this book pretty often. And so I'll read a little. It's called Words That Change Minds, Mastering the Language of Influence. And since this is about persuasion and influence, figured it's a good book to kind of talk about and jump off of. But so it says that, so it's based off this thing called the Language and Behavior Profile, Lab Profile. We're not going to get much into that, but it says, will enable you to understand and predict from someone's language in everyday conversation how he or she will behave in a given situation. You will learn how to customize your language for specific people and groups to trigger motivation and even change people's minds. So this is great for sales conversations, for conversations with kids and spouses. And I use, and you'll see why, but there's some very specific language that she goes over in this book that I will actually, in my final draft or near a final draft of the copy that I'm writing in ads or sales letters, I'll go back and work some of this very specific words and language and phrases in to make sure that I'm hitting the widest possible audience that I'm going after. And you'll see what I mean when we open it up. But before we do that, before we open up the book and dive in, we have a beer.
A brew. And it's, again, another brew from the from our little brewery over in Ashland, North Carolina.
Ashland is referred to it as
Ashland, yes. I don't know why I said Ashland, but
Asheville, North Carolina, home of the Biltmore Estate. If you've not been there, that's like, you got to go there at least once in your life.
Especially during the
Christmas.
the holidays. Where you see the lights and everything. It's really cool.
That place is just massive. I mean,
it's huge.
Like we hear about big houses and, you know, out in California and the tech people, but this place is just...
And the technology, I mean, call it technology, but the technology they had back in the 1800s with elevators and...
Yeah, well, when you have to build your own railroad to get supplies to build your house, you're building something.
Yeah. Yep.
So, I mean, it's an incredible place if you've not been there. And now it's like, I mean, over the last 10, 15 years, man, they've just added vineyards and hotels and everything else to the whole Biltmore grounds. But
the winery is fantastic. I recommend it if you ever go visit the winery.
So if you want to like totally lose your weekend, just go to Asheville. Between the breweries and the wineries and I mean, it's just like bed and breakfast. I mean, there's bed and breakfast everywhere over there.
Yeah, you can stay on campus and
or that whole on-campus facility of the Biltmore. Never leave the Biltmore facility. And
there's a bed and breakfast that my wife and I have been to a couple times. Went there for our 10th anniversary, and I think we went again for 20th. The Hill House Bed and Breakfast. It's right off of downtown a little bit. It's not really walking distance to downtown, but it is a really cool bed and breakfast, good food. That's a nice place to stay. But I mean, Asheville's a great town. If you're ever and it's pretty easy to get to from just about anywhere on the East Coast, really. It's right off of I-40 and 95, I guess.
Really artsy place. I think you see a lot of like, if you're kind of if you kind of lean towards kind of that artistic bend, I think you would like that.
Yeah, some great restaurants there too.
Very good food.
Yeah. So this is
Highlands Brewery.
Oatmeal Porter.
The Oatmeal Porter. So previously we had the Mocha Stout, and which is much darker. This is a porter, but I'm a big fan. And so, what do you think? You've already you've had a sip.
I had a sip. So this does, like, the coffee stout was very coffee.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it was, which I like coffee, so that's good. So I'm getting the ale that we had last episode out of my mouth a little bit still, which you said actually settled in nicely with you.
Yeah, it did. It really did. I enjoyed that.
The old stock ale. So yeah, this is.
My palate was not prepared for it after those ginger cookies, I think, but it was a shock. But
so this just feels kind of normal right now. So I'm gonna let it air out a little bit and continue to sip on it.
I think it's going to get better over time.
Yeah.
If you're comparing this with the mocha or the coffee stout, I like the stout much better.
Yeah.
But this is good.
I mean, I've had some oatmeal porters and I like them typically, so this is probably it'll settle in with me here.
Yeah.
So while we're waiting on that to breathe a little bit, we'll talk about. So we're not going to go through this whole book. We're just going to pull out 4 or 5 like key distinctions that I think are the most common. We'll just do 2 on this episode. Keep it short. So they talk about motivation traits, like why people do what they do.
What triggers?
So there's a whole section here called motivation traits. And one of the ones that really stuck out to me the first time I read this book is that people will do things because they either move towards an outcome or they move away from a circumstance. So, for instance, the easiest one is to think about is, if you think about weight loss or making money, those are 2 of the big ones. So
use weight loss a whole lot.
Yeah, so let's do making money. So a lot of people will move away from poverty and away from financial struggle, and then when they get to a certain point, whatever that safe place is for them, then they kind of turn off the motivation. Because remember, these are motivational traits. So they'll turn off the motivation and just kind of drift, and then what happens is they kind of drift back into that same place they were before. Yeah. And then they'll get fired up and they'll move away from that discomfort again, and then they'll drift back. Yeah. Because the motivation only gets them to that feeling of safeness. Yeah. So it gets them away from the feeling of pain. Right. But it doesn't keep them moving. Yeah. Whereas the other option for that is the towards person, which may move towards being wealthy or towards $1 million business or whatever. So they're going to continue to move forward long after they've gotten away from the pain, because they're moving towards the pleasure. Yeah. So you can think of it as away from pain and towards pleasure, away from, lack and towards abundance, away from being fat to being in good shape, away from, bad relationships to good to moving towards amazing relationships. Like, it could apply to just about anything, and it usually does.
And sometimes those things can shift. I mean, you think about the person that's moving away from something. Well, when they get away, sometimes they can start to fall into the mindset of moving towards something.
It's tough, but it can happen if they've got the right influences and they start reading or learning about it. Yeah. Sometimes just identifying this stuff can help. Yeah. But according to this book, like, a lot of that stuff tends to be pretty hardwired. Yeah. Either by environment.
We're locked in either away or towards.
So why are we talking about this on this podcast? Well, the reason I wanted to bring it up is because I think it's very important. There's a chart in the book for each of these different motivational traits and working traits that we'll talk about in another episode in the future, that about 40% of the population, just general population, is a toward mindset, and about 40% is away from, and about 20% is kind of either or. Like, they're equally towards and away, just kind of figuring. So if you're going to default to whatever you are. Yeah. When you're teaching, when you're selling, when you're trying to influence somebody, that's just human nature. It's kind of like the 5 love languages. You tend to speak your own, even if your spouse is not one of the 5 love languages. You tend to use yours. The opportunity here is that if you're not aware of this dynamic, you're missing out on 40% at least of your audience. So if you're giving a presentation to 10 people in a room at a board meeting, or if you're writing a sales letter and it goes out to 1,000 people, you could be losing 60.
And it's all about it's simply one or the other. It's about the gain or you're focusing on their fear of loss. If you focus in one direction or the other, you're basically missing out on 40%.
Yeah. So how do you know, like, the person you're talking to? So first of all, there's a one-on-one dynamic. Like, how do you know which way that person leans?
Right.
So there's some key things, some key phrases. So a towards person might say, and this is relating to like a job example is what they give here. So if somebody's mainly a towards person, they like moving towards things, I would get personal satisfaction and a promotion. That would be like, that's what they want. If they said, what would be your ideal outcome? Well, I would get personal satisfaction and a promotion. So if they're away from, they might say the same thing about work. If you ask them the same question about work, they might say, I would get away from this boring work, all the deadlines, and my boss who keeps looking over my shoulder.
Right.
So they're getting away from the pain instead of moving towards the opportunity.
Yep.
So you can listen and kind of hear how somebody's talking, and you can kind of tell which way they're leaning, and then you can begin to craft your conversation, your language to appeal to the way they think, right? So there's a section in each one of these traits where she lists out the influencing language that has the most impact. So for instance, on a towards, the type of words that you want to use for a towards person is attain,
gain,
have, get, achieve. Include, achieve, enable you to, advantages, here's what you could accomplish, here's the possibilities,
right.
Like all those types of more positive, aspirational, motivational type words. However, if you're talking to an away person, it's going to be more of like, hey, you won't have to do this. You'll be able to solve this problem. We can prevent you from having to experience this.
Getting rid of.
Yeah, you can
eliminate.
Yeah, all those different words. There'll be no more problems. You won't ever bounce a check again. Those types of things.
Yep.
You'll be able to pay your bills on time. Right. Those kind of things are what you look for. And so what I do when I'm writing or when I'm putting together a presentation for somebody, or even when I'm talking to somebody in coaching, if I'm talking to a group, then I've got to use both because I don't know who's who necessarily, right? So I'll weave in some both. So I might say something like, not only will you, get the new house you want, you'll never have to deal with fixing an old rundown house.
Sure.
All right. So one, it's like talking to somebody who's going to get a new house. The other one's getting out of the old house that keeps breaking or whatever. You could do the same thing with a car, job, anything else.
Yep.
So that's kind of the big point. And you can weave those two almost like you can do a lot of sentences like that where you do not only this, but this, or, and then you're hitting both sides of the scale. So when you are, and this is great for people who do public speaking, because the danger is if you're a motivational speaker, for instance, or you're a really upbeat person and you're giving a presentation, your tendency is going to be focused on the towards people.
Yeah.
And you're going to have 40% of the crowd
half your audience
who thinks you're just a dreamer and it's unrealistic.
They're a bunch of engineers.
I can't do that. I mean, that's great for them, but I can't do that.
Yep.
But if you start talking about getting away from the problem, like they could kind of picture that.
Yeah. And it's usually people that are, what's the logical side of your brain? Is it the right side or the right side's the creative?
Yeah, I don't know.
I think it's the left side that's the more logical. So it's those people more of the logical people tend to be the people that are moving away from or avoiding, that you talk to, because they're the kind of the analytical. Yeah. They're thinking, well, yeah, but wait a minute, but they're the ones that are always looking for the problems and everything. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I'm actually listening to, right now on Audible, I'm listening to The Happiness Advantage with Sean Aker. He talks about that people get locked into, He was talking about the Tetris effect from the video game.
Yeah.
Like if you play that game long enough, like everything looks like a Tetris block.
Yep.
You're trying to fit your computer next to your file cabinet.
Right.
Buildings on the skyline and all that kind of stuff. And there's a positive and negative effect to that.
Yeah.
Like if you are like accountants and lawyers and things like that, or their job is to look for problems, and then they tend to see problems everywhere in life.
Yep.
So that's a danger you can fall into.
Yep.
But that kind of leads into the next thing we were going to talk about, which is reason. Mm-hmm. So like, and by reason we mean like the way people think and the way they want to, the way they process stuff. So this is, some people, they see options, and some people see procedures. Like they're drawn to options.
Yep.
Like I want to know all the cereals on the cereal aisle. You know, the other person wants to know just like how to go walk down the aisle, pick the first cereal, and like get it done, and like procedure based. So there's options and procedures. And that wasn't the best metaphor, but that's so this is the same thing. This is 40% are procedure oriented, 40% are options oriented, and then there's about 20% that are a mix of both. So again, if you're only speaking to one or the other, you're missing out on at least 40% of the audience.
Yeah.
So what does it sound like if somebody mainly sees the world and is motivated by options? They say, I thought it would be a stimulating, interesting, and challenging experience.
Yeah.
Whereas somebody whose procedures would be like, I didn't really choose. I met my boss through my brother-in-law who worked with her. They needed a technician, and I was just completing. Like to them, it's just a series of events that happens, and that's just, it's fate. It's whatever. Like they don't really have an option.
Right.
They don't have, those would be the people who don't really believe in. They believe in fate more than they believe in free choice. Would be another way to look at that. And so you can pick up, if you listen, you can kind of tell which way a person leans, and then you can begin to change your language to influence that person in a way that benefits, you matching your product or your service to their core desires. And neither one is right or wrong. Like options or procedures, neither one's better than the other. It's just the way people are wired.
Yeah.
So you don't want to we have to be careful as influencers not to make the mistake that like one is better than the other.
Yeah.
We need just to be aware of it.
To understand it.
Yeah. So that we can then motivate the person in the direction that's going to best benefit them by getting our product or service, if that's a fit. So for instance, when we talk about influencing language, options people want to hear about opportunity. They want to hear about choice. They want to hear about another better way. Yeah. They want to hear about unlimited possibilities, alternatives. They want to hear about, so they would be like, that's one way, but here's some other options.
Right.
You could buy that software, but here's 3 other options for you. Here's why we like this one, but it's your choice. Yeah. Like the options person, you better leave them with a choice. And we talked about this when we talked about Instant Influence, the book Instant Influence, and leaving people with the power of choice. Especially for options people, they need that. However, a procedure person doesn't want the choice. They need to know what's the next step.
Right. So just give me the, don't give me the fluff. Just tell me what the steps.
And that person, you need to lead them in the sale. You need to assume the sale with that person. Whereas if you do that with the options person, they're going to push back because now you're pigeonholing them, right? And you're not giving them the choice, right? So you really have to pick up on the language, especially in one-on-one or in group settings. And you can kind of you can kind of mix the two if you're talking to a group. So the procedures person, to go back to that, would be, this is the right way. First you do this, then you do that, after which you do this. This is what it's going to look like. You're going to, once you place your order, this is going to happen. Like you can lay out what's going to happen in the sales process so they feel comfortable with it because now they know the procedure. And that's something I know Dan Kennedy's talked about, and as well as John Benson. Like when you're doing your close on your sale, whether it's a sales letter or whether it's a presentation, to really lay out exactly what happens from the time they say yes. Mm-hmm. Like, you're going to click this button. So let's say it's online. You're going to click this button, the big yellow button that says buy now. It's going to take you to an order page. Here's what a picture of the order page looks like. You're going to fill in your name and address, and you go very procedure oriented. And that's so that you're hitting this 40% of the people that are procedure oriented. Right. That'll bore some of the options people, but you've got to hit both. Yeah. And you just need to be aware and work the language so that on the options people, you can give them here's two, like Amazon does a good job of this. Like, do you want this gift wrap? Do you want 2-day shipping, 3-day shipping, or 4-day? Those are options, right? Yeah. So, but it's embedded within the process. Mm-hmm. So they're hitting both people all the time. So that's not quite as random as it looks when you go to the Amazon checkout. Like, they know the science of this stuff and what makes people buy and finish the checkout process. So that's my two things. I did a lot of talking.
So yeah, and I'm just curious. So your experience as a copywriter, especially in the financial industry, do you find this? Did you find? I mean, thinking back, was this pretty much dead on 40% in that industry? Because I'm sure that every industry is probably,
Well, obviously, your engineer is going to be more procedure based.
Yeah, because in my industry, I would say that it's probably 70% are moving away. 60 to 70% are probably moving away.
Yeah,
so
and I would think it would also depend on, like, a foreman is going to be like if you had a group of foremen that were on the job floor, is going to be different than a group of CEOs or C-level suite executives. Mm-hmm. You may have some tendencies in those two areas where one will be more procedures and more away from problems, whereas a C-level executive might be more forward-thinking, like an operations manager may be more away from, but a CEO is going to be more visionary and towards. Yeah. So if you're in a room with a CEO and a COO and a CFO, you better be hitting both sides of these, because they're going to see the world differently.
The CEO he's the visionary side. Yeah.
But to answer your question, when I wrote financial, I tried to hit both. Mm-hmm. First of all, you don't get direct feedback, because we're writing sales letters and it was online a lot of times. But just knowing the market and, long before I got into copywriting, I used to sell financial products like annuities and life insurance and other stuff. And I did it in-home. So I sat down with hundreds of people in-home and did presentations and had the back and forth. So I kind of knew that. And, absolutely some of them are moving away from running out of money in retirement. And some of them are, we talked about this in a previous episode, maybe last week, that a lot of people that buy financial newsletters are trying to make up for lost time.
Sure.
And they're trying to get the one big win, the 10-bagger,
to make up for the hole that
to make up for the years they weren't saving or they weren't investing in their 40s and 50s. So they're trying to make it all up now. Other people are just moving towards, they just want to be, comfortable, or they want to grow their investments so that they can leave inheritance for their kids.
Sure.
That's moving towards something. So you kind of had to work your copy to hit both of those. Yeah. Kind of the, make sure you never run out of money in retirement and leave a legacy for your kids.
Yeah.
And they'll key in. It's kind of like your horoscope. Like, if it's you, like,
you'll focus in on what.
You're not going to read the other 11. You're going to read yours.
You'll tune that out, and you'll hit what.
Yeah, and it's kind of the same thing in these. The people that want to hear, the people who think that way will hear the part that they need to hear.
Yep. Yeah.
But if you only offer one, you're missing out on at least, you might as well just say half your audience. Yeah. That's a big difference in sales.
It is. It really is.
So
you mentioned that as a professional speaker, people that go into speaking need to understand that, Yeah,
because you're wired with half the crowd, but you're completely differently wired than probably half the crowd.
Yep.
And even even if you went to a Tony Robbins event, even in that type of event where it's still an aspirational event and you would think, it would be easy to think that it was all people who are towards people. It's not. A lot of people are there to get away from pain, which is Tony's story too.
No,
right?
Exactly. He talks about that in great detail.
That was a big motivator for him up until he learned some principles. And then, like you asked earlier, like then you can shift from being away to a towards or, you know.
Yeah.
But at first, he just needs to get out of the one-bedroom apartment and, you know, not be hungry.
Yep.
But at some point, he learned skills and principles and things that allowed him to shift and see a bigger future for people. But
it's kind of like you ever seen that movie, or it's not a movie, that show, talking about TV shows, Breaking Bad? Mm-hmm. So the main character starts out at the beginning, and, you know, he's just a simple math teacher. So his whole motivation in life, you know, for becoming a meth,
just to pay some bills.
Yeah. You know, it's like, he's just trying to, and he's so pinpoint, he's got it down to the very pinpoint number. It's like $700 and something thousand that he needs. You know, he's already mapped it out. So he just needs to get to that point. Well, you know, he gets to that point, you know, and he's his whole motivation is moving away from when he, you know, thinking that he may die of cancer and leave his family destitute, you know. So he thinks, you know, I need this amount of money to leave to my family. Well, he reaches that and then, you know, starts to move past that. And that's where things start to move, like things start to shift, where he starts moving towards, you know, what I can be is like, you know, a kingpin, pretty much, you know, where I can make a whole lot more than what I've, you know, originally thought I could. So
yeah, my experience is most people tend to stay where they're at, that type of thing, without coaching or without.
So they hit their goal, you know, or they talk about hitting that to move away from the pain. They hit that, and then it's like they go on.
The people that you see kind of doing the roller coaster thing, those are probably away from people.
They just go on cruise control once they've.
Yep, and then because just the way life is, you kind of drift backwards.
Yep.
Towards people, just kind of keep moving on.
Yeah.
Towards. Now, there's some dangers of that too. Like you can suffer burnout. You can do other things if you're always moving.
Yeah.
Or you can be very unsatisfied.
Yeah.
Right? Like unhappy because you're never there. Mm-hmm. So that's the danger of the towards side. Like it sounds good at first, but when you think about it, it's like you could really wear yourself out. And that's kind of the hustle and grind 24/7 crowd.
Oh, I know.
It's never enough. Got to work out 7 days a week, 6 hours a day. You know,
I've
work 18 hours a day. You know,
I had a past client that I don't think he ever met or he saw like a motivational course or anything that he didn't like. I mean, he was always kind of in that mindset of just, I'm going to buy this. I'm going to spend 10 grand, you know, every time, just because he's always like, if this will help me get ahead, this will help me get ahead. Yeah.
Jerry Seinfeld comes to mind, like on the sitcom, like nothing was ever good enough for him. Like he was always moving towards like the perfect date.
Right. Yeah.
But there was like, there was no woman that was ever good enough. So he was always looking for that ideal.
Right.
You know, so that's the danger. It's like, it's never good enough.
Yep.
So, but from our standpoint as persuasion and influence people, the point here of this episode is to understand that there are these different motivations and that you have to talk to both.
Yeah.
Like if you really want to get into the majority of the market and you want to sell to the most people in the room at the time, you've got to use language and understand that there's two different motivations.
Two sides. Yeah.
And in a future episode, maybe 2 or 3 episodes from now, we'll talk about working traits and some of the things there. So we're only going to hit a few of these, but the book again is Words That Change Minds. We'll put it in the show notes.
Definitely. And
it's a great book. Yeah. If you're in sales, copy, marketing, it's one of those books that nobody's ever told me about. It's just one I stumbled on. Because I'll go through this period where I'll buy a certain book and then I'll just buy everything Amazon recommends around it.
Around it, yeah.
Like other customers have bought, type thing.
Which is another brilliant marketing from.
Yeah, that's a whole. So it's like this is a book you would never find in the physical bookstore, and it's just it's been a gold mine for me to tap into, and especially because it has very specific language keys that you can key off of and use in your presentation. So
cool. Well, we'll add this a link to that book on our show page, and then we'll also add it into the recommended books section on our website. You can find us again over at Persuasion by the Pint, and we'll also add a link to the Highland. What do you think, Highland Brewery?
It's good
so far. It get a little better between the oatmeal porter and the mocha stout, which
I like the mocha stout better.
Yeah, I did too. Yeah,
but it's just because it's so distinct. Like this could be a lot of different beers. Like a lot of the porters, like it doesn't stand out, but the coffee stout like has its own unique kind of flavor. So I definitely like, and you're drinking a coffee stout. Like this is an oatmeal porter, but it could be just a porter. It could be it's not that clear like distinction to me.
Just not thick enough,
But it's,
all right,
it's good beer though.
Yeah, it is. It is. So we'll put links on this for all of the this brew and some of the past episodes we've talked about. But hey, thanks for listening. Again, persuasionbythepint.com. You can find us on a number of podcast platforms. Leave us 5 stars if this is your first time listening to us. If you like the content, you can go back and listen to a lot of previous episodes, and we'll continue to put more of this content out each and every week. So
sounds good.
Yep. Thanks for listening.
Thanks.